At this gathering near a private lakefront in eastern North Carolina, a group of contemporary Americans assemble into a tribe. As night falls, a lone drummer calls the others to join in a ritual ceremony, one that has roots deep in human history. Though this ceremony has sacred qualities, it isn't really part of an organized religious group, but an informal gathering. When the ceremony ends, drummers say they feel better, renewed, more joyful.
It's hard to explain it. I just feel better, even though I'm still in pain. I'm more relaxed about the pain.
Far to the north, in a pain clinic at Hershey Medical Center in Pennsylvania, a different group of people form a circle for an experiment in hypnosis. The members of this group hope that a combination of meditation techniques, hypnosis, and group support will help relieve a variety of painful physical symptoms.
I was sent here from the pain management clinic in the Hershey Medical Center because I was in a car accident in 1979. I've had 5 head surgeries, and I have chronic head pain all the time. So I was having very little sleep. The pain is that bad that I couldn't sleep. And I came here on the recommendation of the pain management doctor, and the program really worked as far as getting me sleep. It hasn't reduced the pain, but I sleep better, and so I can tolerate the pain and I can function more effectively.
On a bright fall morning in Harrisburg, Lois Donovan, one of the counselors of this healing center, arrives for work. This center is one example of many practices in healing and alternative medicine that have become popular in the last decade. Most communities have some sort of alternative medical practitioner or New Age bookstore where people come to find information and relief.
Come on in.
Hello, hello, hello. How are you today?
The people who come to this sacred arts bookstore embrace a variety of healing methods that are alternatives to standard Western medical practice, from aromatherapy, herbs and crystals, to massage, counseling, touch, prayer, or other treatments not usually a part of standard Western medical custom. All are intended to alleviate human suffering. The individuals you see here participating in alternative treatments and attending ritual ceremonies to improve their well-being are contemporary Americans. Teachers, contractors, mechanics, business leaders, engineers, maybe even your neighbors. A variety of people from a variety of backgrounds and religious beliefs. Some of the people here are trying alternatives because of disappointments with Western medicine. Some try alternatives because of the recommendations of friends. Some may explore the alternative simply because they can. The one thing all these different people have in common is the ability to respond to ritualized suggestion, just as people have been yielding to suggestion since the beginning of humankind.
I began this journey probably in that same place, as afraid of healing and a lot of things I found it along the way. But as you open yourself to the idea that healing is available to you personally in your life, you will find that healing manifests itself in your life.
Well, I believe in the body, mind, and spirit, and I think there was some healing done, some release somewhere. I'm not totally aware of what all happened, but things were lifted, and it's wonderful.
I'm so filled with wonder every day. I'm just so amazed to be a witness or a participant in someone's healing process. I think it was M. Scott Peck who said that God is not something we can figure out and then carry around in our hip pocket. And whatever God is certainly present in healing.
I don't think you even have to be like a believer in it, because I was really skeptical at first. It was scary, but like I said, I was willing to try anything. It is very different. There's no doubt about that.
Magic may be the earliest known system of natural philosophy, with origins among the first human tribes. From the primitive peoples of ancient Africa, to the astrologers and magicians of Babylon, to the priest-physicians of Egypt, and the shamans of American Indian tribes. All believed in magical healing. But what does it mean when contemporary Americans assemble around a fire to meditate or beat on drums? Some observers have suggested that America is entering a new dark age of ignorance and neo-paganism. However, it may be that contemporary people have rediscovered the real health benefits that they can achieve through suggestion and altered states of consciousness.
She calls it energy work. I call her my witch doctor.
I studied therapeutic touch and had been doing that for a couple of years, just with family and friends. And I received a phone call one evening from my mother, quite hysterical. My sister had been burned in a grease fire cooking from her fingertips to her shoulder, and asked me to meet them at the emergency room. They had taken her to the hospital in an ambulance. So when I got there, I was able to go back and be with her in the emergency room because I'm also a nurse and they let me be with her. And she was in a great deal of pain, and so I just wanted to help alleviate some of the pain and possibly facilitate the healing process. So I started doing therapeutic touch with her, which is you don't really touch the physical body, you just kind of work to connect with the energy and move things and kind of smooth out the energy field around the person. So that's what I did. And I was with her for about 6 or 8 hours, working with her, being with her, and trying to facilitate the healing and alleviate some of the pain. And she was admitted to the hospital. It was third-degree burns, and she was told that she'd probably end up having to have skin grafts because the burns were so severe. The next morning, I received a phone call from my mother, who was really ecstatic and excited because the physicians, when they had come in and looked at the burn, said, "Geez, we don't know what happened, but you can go home." And of course my mother said, "Oh, I knew what happened. My daughter was here and she was doing this healing." And anyway, my sister went home and she has no scars.
For many thousands of years, shamans or priest-physicians used a variety of methods to rid their patients of disease, despondency, and private demons. These methods included such things as incantations, drumming, dancing, and miraculous rituals. Sociologist James McClenon believes these shamanic methods often worked because of the therapeutic qualities found within altered conscious states, conditions of the mind induced through shamanic practices.
There's just this huge preponderance of evidence showing that there is this progression of fossil remains showing that human evolution did occur, and so it's natural to argue that the modern propensity for religious experiences evolved through that process. And I'm suggesting that this evolutionary process was associated with spiritual healing. Now, some people were very, very skeptical about religious experience. They would like to debunk it. They would like to debunk the notion that people have, or that it's possible to have religious experiences or anomalous experiences, but people still have them anyway. So if we're going to have a scientific theory that explains how we became the way that we are, we need to base it on the evidence as we have it, not as we would like it to be.
A chain of evidence linking animal behavior to human religious ritual implies that religious sentiment developed as part of an evolutionary process. Shamanic belief systems developed over time because the practices contributed to human survival.
It seems very likely that there's been this evolutionary progression from animals to humans with regard to hypnosis, because animals demonstrate a kind of hypnotic capacity. Certain animals, if you shift them quickly or touch them repeatedly in a certain manner or confine them, they'll freeze up and demonstrate a type of anesthesia. They won't respond to pain. So that this is what we refer to as animal hypnosis. When chimpanzees groom each other, they'll pass into a kind of dreamy state. So, and they engage in very, very rudimentary rituals. So it's easy to speculate that animal hypnosis, through an evolutionary process, led to human hypnosis.
This individual probably went to the tribal shaman for help when she was sick. The rituals the shaman used to help her may have included rhythmic drumming, chanting, or dancing. Shamans also used meditation and prayer. Any of these rituals could create an altered state of consciousness, which we know today is characterized by particular brainwave patterns.
What is going on when a shaman beats a drum, his shaman drum, her shaman drum, in this rhythm? What's happening? Well, we have investigated. And what we find is that on the brainwave pattern, a theta rhythm is imposed. And theta rhythm is characteristic of the sleep and near sleep state. So it seems that, perhaps, shamans have found a direct route to the subconscious mind. Maybe the drum is a psychedelic tool. Perhaps shamans do their healing work by accessing deep levels of the subconscious, and perhaps the drum is one of the tools to do that.
Most theories regarding the origin of religion assume that spiritual beliefs evolved from human loss, confusion, or false logic. Some scholars attribute the first religious impulses to the misinterpretation of such things as dreams, shadows, even reflections. But Paleolithic religious sentiment may not have been based solely on human fallacies or misunderstandings about how the world works. As Dr. David Hufford explains, human fallacy and misunderstanding can't account for the prevalence of alternative and spiritual healing.
We know now, and it's really been over the last 20 years gradually dawning on people as more studies have been done, that people throughout the population use a wide variety of alternative practices, ranging from sort of folk practices through institutional religious healing to all kinds of alternatives from other lands, things like acupuncture, old things like homeopathy, new things like New Age kind of healing things. And that in fact, in terms of the prevalence of these practices, they're more common among people who are well educated than among people who have less education. So the idea that modern culture or modern society prevents people from doing these things isn't the case. It's not true. And there are probably many reasons for this. Some of them are the limits of modern conventional medicine. Some of them are shortcomings of modern medicine, not enough attention to the experience of the sick person, not enough emotional support. But there are other things too. And I think one of the crucial things is that a substantial number of people find that when they try alternative methods, that they seem to work, that they have the experience of feeling better, sometimes of getting better, and sometimes remarkable things happen.
I think that a lot of times our illnesses are a message to us, a wake-up call, so to speak, or a message of discomfort saying something's out of alignment in your life and it's time to do something about it, pay attention.
Well, because it seems kind of extraordinary, and it seems special, and it seems very pure and somewhat spiritual, kind of wondrous, yes.
Religious sentiment may have evolved in part from the therapeutic qualities of altered states of consciousness, a condition of mind that can be induced through shamanic practices.
Hypnosis is just a term for a secularized, altered state of consciousness. People within religious rituals are also using forms of hypnosis to achieve altered states of consciousness, and in that way they can gain the therapeutic benefits. Now, in a Western medical setting, we refer to this altered state of consciousness as hypnosis, and it seems to be a little bit less powerful without that religious belief system to back it up.
And I don't separate psychotherapy and spiritual healing and physical healing. It's all a part of one process. And that process begins as a deep understanding that I have the power to know what's right. I have the power to heal myself.
I literally gave up. I just more or less told everybody that I was going to make ready for my funeral. I was going to go ahead and order the casket. I mean, I was ready to go. And that lasted about a week, and I decided it was time to, more or less time for me to take control of me. Not worry about some doctor telling me that, you know, I'm going to do this to you, I'm going to do that to you, and when we're all done, maybe we'll have a remission. And then we'll give you 5 years. I don't want 5 years, I'm going to have another 50. And I just made up my mind that I was going to fight it. 90% of it is right here in your head anyway. Your mind can do anything to your body, and then given the proper type of nutrients and the proper type of enhancers, then you can do anything.
I really, really believe, honestly, in my heart and with all that there is of me, to believe that we are not just a body. I don't believe that we're just a mind, but I think we're also a spirit. And I think until you get the three in equal balance, the perfect harmony, that's where it comes from. I can say to my head can say all the time, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, and my body can be flat on my back. And what good is talking to the wall? The wall could be fine, but I'm not. So when you strike that balance, and if you're able to, I was born and raised to pray, and that's a matter of to each his own. I've known people that walk down the street and say, oh, what beautiful flowers, and to me that's their expression of a prayer, because they're thankful. And if you're not first grateful for what you have, and then if you're not willing to use your good mind that you've been given, whether it's a small one or a large one, and be willing to accept that there's more to you than what we all see. There's definitely more.
The doctors had given me very little prospect of living an active life again. And yet now I'm working full-time and travel, and I'm only slightly limited in what I can do physically. So I think the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things that they gave me, was hope.
It's in God's hand now. I said, if you got any faith at all, so you just pray. And I did. I prayed, and I prayed. And she did live. She lived 2 more years. It was a Saturday before Easter when they took her to surgery, and the Saturday before Easter, 2 years later, she died. I really think it was, I don't know, by that time, I was a little better with it. But I think if she had gone those 2 years, I couldn't have made it. I really couldn't have. And I think prayer's the only thing that brought her through that surgery. The fact that she had faith and I had faith too.
My process right now, how I'm doing now, is that the healing has taken place deep inside of the self. And what is happening now is that the physical body is catching up to the soul body, the emotional body, the heart body. I am doing very well as far as strength right now, and it's a matter of finding the time to exercise more so that the body can become stronger and stronger, and that I can carry myself. But primarily, 8 months ago, I should have been in a wheelchair.
Some people fall easily into the hypnotic state, while others don't. Research suggests that those individuals who reach a trance state more readily will tend to respond to suggestion within religious rituals. These individuals will often achieve greater therapeutic benefits from the ritual than individuals who have more difficulty achieving a hypnotic state.
There would be a tendency for people who were more hypnotizable to survive, while those who were less hypnotizable would have a less probability of survival. So over the last 30,000 years, our human species has probably engaged in ritual activities which has selected for the traits which contribute to spiritual healing. So today, the practices that we are engaging in, these spiritual healing practices, probably have a physiological basis. There's an aspect of being human which makes it possible for us to respond to spiritual healing.
Physicians have used hypnosis to reduce surgical blood loss and post-surgical pain, and for the treatment of hemophiliacs. If we turn to folklore literature, we can find many accounts suggesting that ritual practices aid in controlling hemorrhage. A person thought to be a blood stopper recites a magical verse which resolves a wide variety of problems, from minor cuts to postpartum hemorrhage.
And he fell and had a big gash in his knee. So they were trying to bandage it up. They thought that they could just cover it up and it'll stop bleeding, but it wasn't. So at that time, my cousin was real scared that he would need to go to the hospital. So she told me to go get her Bible. She said, Sugar, she always called me Sugar. She said, Sugar, go into the front bedroom and get my Bible. So I said, okay, grandmother. So I walked into the bedroom, I got her Bible. And at the time, she, was hard for her to read. So she told me to turn to Ecclesiastes 16:6. And so at the time, she just started saying, Jesus, 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 while I was opening the Bible to the passage. So at that time, she stuck out her hand. She didn't touch his knee, but as she was at the point where the knee was at. And then she began to read the passage, and she said, And when I passed by thee, and saw thee polluted in thine own blood, I was said unto thee, when thou wast in thy blood, live. Yea, I said unto thee, when thou wast in thy blood, live. And she continuously said that, and she said it, and she said that verse repeatedly until the blood had stopped.
The ability to achieve altered states of consciousness through shamanic ritual not only assisted human survival, but ensured growth of human populations by affecting childbirth. Shamanic, hypnotic rituals appear to have been valuable for reducing problems associated with labor and delivery. Recent research shows that hypnotically prepared births entailed shorter labors, less medication, and healthier babies. There are practical similarities between hypnosis and the Lamaze method for childbirth, indicating that hypnotherapy is useful for reducing trauma of labor. Other methods used by healers have also been useful in assisting childbirth. These alternatives include therapeutic touch, massage, and energy work, where the healer manipulates energy fields surrounding the body.
I became pregnant for the third time, and I had had problems. I had had 2 previous miscarriages, and I was having the same problems with this one. And when I came in to Sherry for a back appointment, I told her what was happening, and she said she could help me. And I said, well, what do you mean you can help me? And she said, well, she says, I think that I can help you hold the pregnancy.
And she came in quite distressed. And I asked her what was going on, what was happening, and she seemed really upset. And she said, I am really upset. I'm pregnant. And I found that kind of curious because she had been wanting to be pregnant for years and had had several miscarriages. And so I said to her, I thought that was a good thing. I thought you'd be happy about that. And she said, well, I was really happy, but the same thing's happening. I'm bleeding, I'm having cramping. I've been to the doctor, and I'm probably going to lose the baby, and I'm so upset that I'm going through this again.
I went home and thought about it, and I thought I had nothing to lose because I was 40 years old, and it was my 3rd pregnancy, and I knew I was losing this one also. So I called her back, and we made an appointment right away. And her first therapy, she worked on me, and I went home, and the cramping stopped tremendously. And I had one more appointment with her, and it stopped completely. And I had a doctor's appointment just a couple weeks after that, my first one, and they said everything was fine. Sent me for a sonogram, and he was doing well. And so that's really what made me a believer.
So Jacob was born 9 months later.
And as a result, here he is. And I know that this therapy seems strange to us, but it's because it's not the type of way of healing to us. But all I know is it works.
The interaction between spiritual healing, fertility, and childbirth may explain the special relationship between femininity and the occult. Women in modern societies continue to perform important roles as spiritual healers. Contemporary shamans or healers are often individuals who were searching for cures to their own physical or emotional problems. In the process of learning to heal themselves, they discovered how to help others.
I became ill, physically ill. I was emotionally depressed also, but the physical illness is what brought me to alternative healers. People who would do hands-on energy work or acupuncture. I tried a lot of different things that all worked, and I went from one process to another. And through that process, I learned more about the different kinds of healing. I already was not using allopathic healing that much. I was using homeopathy and other methods, but it was in the time of the crisis that I really went searching, and that in that process I started to find out more about myself and about my ability to use this my hands and myself to help other people to feel good. Even when I worked at the medical center, people used to come to my office if they had a headache and say, can you help take my headache away? And I don't really do anything, I didn't even know what I was doing. I would just put my hands on it and let my hands do what felt right. And that's always actually been what I've done in whatever I do now or what I've done in the past. It's like I don't think, well, I need to make this person better. What I need to do is step out of the picture, me. I just have to just let it be and allow myself to just feel. Sometimes I feel it inside, sometimes I feel it outside, but just feel what I need to do and trust in that guidance and in what I know internally. And so it's a process of whatever has been done for me becomes a part of me. Whatever I feel or experience becomes a part of what I can do for someone else. And then what I do for them becomes a part of them. So what I see is that all of us have the ability to heal on some level. Maybe everybody won't have a sign out and people coming to them, but we all can say something that's healing to someone or put our hand on someone and have that transfer of our compassion to them. And it's healing. I mean, I think that's part of the human condition.
Going through that traumatic experience, the issues of abandonment, the issues of unworthiness, lots of issues came up for me, and I just noticed that I had a lot to work on inside myself in order to find more peace and joy. And so I started that self-discovery process. Personally, I'm very kinesthetic, so body work was one of my first choices because I do live in my body a lot, and a lot of my emotions were stored in my body, and it was important for me to get in touch with them and learn how to release them.
That really caused me to start searching more and more about what's happening here, what's this about, particularly because I have a very analytical mind also. I was a critical care nurse for 22 years, and so I really wanted to understand what's this about, what's happening here. And that led me to start investigating and really led me deeply into my journey in becoming a healer.
For grief counselor Lois Donovan, The wondrous event that helped her heal her own grief assists her in counseling her patients.
Our daughter was killed in a car accident, and after her death, my husband had a sense of her presence for about a week or so after her death, and I did not, and I felt quite disappointed about that. So the weeks passed, and I had dreams about Angie, but no sense of presence. And then one day, 3 months after her death, I was in the house alone, and I was looking out the back kitchen window and doing something in the sink, probably washing dishes, I don't remember. And I heard the front door close, and I turned around to look at the front door in the living room, which I could see from the kitchen spot, and I saw my daughter walking in the front door. And it was a startling sight because I saw her as if she were alive. She was in full color. She had her Burger King uniform on, which was red and gold at that time. And she came through the living room, turned at the hallway, and walked down the hall. Well, I was leaning on the kitchen sink, hanging on to it, because I really thought I had lost it. I thought I was crazed with grief and that I was imagining things. I was going crazy. So at the time, it was not a good experience. In retrospect, it was an enormous experience, because as I grew in consciousness and understanding of what people go through in grief and what kind of experiences they have, I realized that I had been given a priceless gift. What came with that was a sense of loss, that I hadn't experienced it to the fullest when it happened because of my bias, which a lot of people in our culture have, that if you can't see it, taste it, touch it, feel it with your 5 senses, it doesn't exist.
Really, just in the last 20 or 25 years, people have started to be aware that bereaved people very often, as a normal part of grief, not as a symptom of some kind of neurotic problem, have an experience of, from their point of view, being visited by their deceased loved one. That, by the mid-1970s, had entered into the medical literature as a normal part of grief. They were called hallucinations of bereavement, which is, of course, not what the people who have them like to call them. But the thing that was, one of the things that took it out of the domain of pathology was the observation that people who had those experiences, typically, they helped them resolve their grief sometimes right on the spot. And I've talked to people for whom that was the case, people who were terribly distressed, who were having difficulty sleeping, were all of the things that go with severe grief, who had such a visit, such an experience, and they were fixed. They got right up, and they were no longer. It wasn't that they were no longer sad or didn't miss the person, but the grief resolved, and they were no longer incapacitated. I don't think we know how common those experiences are, because people, by and large, are afraid to talk about them. But there's every indication that they're very common, and I've interviewed lots of people who've had those experiences, and that's a kind of healing too.
The morning of August the 8th, I had another incredible experience that was wondrously healing. And what that was is I was lying on the couch. I'd waked early. Now, I wasn't ready to get up yet, and so I went to lie on the couch in the living room. And while I was lying there, I heard footsteps in the hall. And I thought, well, my husband must be up early. And I heard a voice that called my name. And I thought, oh, it must be him. And then I realized, no, that it was a woman's voice. And a moment later, I saw a woman's hands and arms come around the front of my face. And it was like she was lifting something up over my head. And I turned, and there was Angie. And I was just like, wow. And I said, I've just missed you so much. And she said, I've missed you too. And I reached over and I hugged her. And she disappeared. Well, that was incredible to me. and it was very healing.
Early shamanic treatments may have opened the process that shaped human biological development, affecting the percentage of humans with the capacity for hypnotic and religious experience. The process contributed to the belief that exterior, unseen forces could affect people's physical well-being. Although science has superseded magic in the medical arts, wondrous healing, or alternative healing, remains a potent alternative force, one that is increasingly accepted by traditional Western medicine.
There has been this traditional perception that the people who explore alternative medical care are the uneducated, the old, the downtrodden, the funky, and all sorts of other marginal groups. The truth of the matter is that most alternative care is rendered to highly educated, middle to upper middle class people in this country.
And I think it's a matter of, first, us in the medical profession learning that there is spiritual healing, learning it through our patients by listening to our patients. The kinds of questions we need to ask are not on the usual history forums. We ask great details about the sex life, but it's not routine to ask questions about a person's spiritual pathway.
We have so given ourselves over to cure and have misunderstood what care is, that there is a, there has developed, I think, this sense that only high tech is what really helps people. The truth of the matter is, the average person on the street several years ago became disenchanted with high-tech medicine, and there has very quietly, simultaneously developed this underground culture. Even in South Central Pennsylvania, people will have their family physician at the same time. They'll have another complete paramedical network of alternative methods for dealing with their problems. And I think that's because, first of all, people have become aware of the fact that Western allopathic medicine doesn't cure everything, second, number one. Number two, it doesn't do a very good job at some very common problems.
Or I want my doctor, my physician, to be less ready to take care of the symptom, to make the symptom go away, and more ready to work with that symptom to find out what's going on, why it has manifested itself in that particular place in my body, what it's trying to tell us about myself, my lifestyle, my body, my spiritual situation. There are times when the symptom needs to be cared for, but I think too often physicians have moved too quickly to silence the symptoms before they teach us what they have to teach us about ourselves and our own spiritual needs.
And there are a lot of other problems that have to do with living that that high-tech medicine simply either doesn't address or doesn't address very well. So knowing that, there is no question in my mind that people simultaneously find ways to get their needs met. The problem is they don't tell their physician that. So the physician has the assumption that he or she has the only show in town. The truth of the matter is we don't have the only show in town.
I think there are many aspects of alternative medicine that can be, or that at least theoretically could be integrated into conventional medicine. There are some that are unlikely to be, even though it's theoretically possible. And there are some that probably can't be and perhaps shouldn't be. I think it's very important not to let the ability to integrate into conventional medicine to be the number one determination of whether something is considered to be potentially useful. I would take AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, as an example of what is clearly an alternative, a spiritually based alternative healing system for addictive diseases. And over the years, gradually, medicine has come to realize that this is a very highly effective treatment, and perhaps the most effective one that exists at this point. And yet, when people try to integrate it into the conventional delivery system, sometimes the results are really unfortunate. To try to make that part of an inpatient program, for example, where you have a limited amount of time in terms of insurance coverage and so forth, you have to move people through the program. Well, you can't very well say, here's how long you've got to get through the 12 steps in a 12-step program. It just doesn't work. It works much better out in the community. At least that's my opinion and that of some others. It works great out in the community. There's no reason that you can't have your physician working with you on the problem of alcoholism and also be a member of AA. But to make it something that is prescribed or covered by insurance or done in-house, problematic.
The consumer is beginning to register a vote of no confidence in the system as we have it. And that's unfortunate, because we have worked extraordinarily hard to bring, for example, our society the finest medicine available in the world today. And yet at the time when we've worked so hard, there has never been a time when society has been as discontent. So we are in a, as Shakespeare would say, a winter of discontent here. And I think that discontent needs to be taken seriously. And I think it's a call, a plea for modifying our philosophy, not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but modifying our philosophy to take into account that we're not meeting all the needs of the people, and that we need to rethink things that we tended to discard, say, 100 years ago.
Well, we know that there's many other processes going on besides hypnosis related to illness. There's whole physiological explanations, and the medical practice deals with these types of problems. So the psychological component to illness is just one component. There's many other components besides that.
For most people, when they seek a spiritual healing of a serious physical disease, if they don't get a physical healing, they still feel comforted, supported, eased, that the existential anxieties and problems of their disease, some of which are sort of theological problems, like why me is a theological question, that there's a process of healing that even those who have no physical help at all get, which helps them to cope with their disease.
May I tell you a story about a patient named Joanne, it's her real name, came to me as a young woman. I delivered her 2 children. She moved away, 25 miles away, out of my house call range, and but came back about 7 or 8 years later with a neurological disease and of some sort, and I referred her to the neurologist, and she turned out to have amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, with an estimated lifespan of 3 to 4 years. I saw her infrequently after that because she was in another area and with another doctor, but I stopped in to see her or called her a couple times a year just to check on her. And each time I did, she said, well, God has healed me. And I said, yeah, that's wonderful, Joanne, but I didn't understand this. And so I went to visit her, and she had neurologically deteriorated tremendously. She could not get around. She stayed in a chair. She couldn't get up. Her husband, they lived in a trailer. They were very simple folks and very poor. And he would fix her up in the chair before he went to work each morning, and she stayed that way until he came home. And that was her life. But she was full of smiles, delighted to see me, and she could still talk, and she said God had healed her. And so I said, well, I don't understand this, you know, you're in a chair. And her husband said, how come I have to carry you to the bathroom? And she said, God has healed me, but I'm waiting for the manifestation. And I didn't understand this, but I did understand that she was very much at peace. And if you asked her, as I did one time, if she isn't lonesome there all by herself every day, and she said, I'm never alone. And she was so aware of the presence of God that she was just at peace. That went on not the usual 3 or 4 years, but some 16 years later, she was still living, and every time I would go, or anyone would go, still full of smiles. when she could no longer talk and could hardly swallow, she was still a very happy woman who was at peace. Her husband died first, and when he died, she told me she couldn't go on any longer, and 2 weeks later she died. But she, I think, had a true spiritual healing, and it taught me a lot.
Although the therapeutic benefits of altered states may explain some of the processes of wondrous healing, some events are still beyond our understanding and can't be explained by the therapeutic qualities of hypnosis or altered conscious states. These are aspects of spiritual healing that remain genuinely wondrous.
I kind of have an interesting experience when my eyes are closed and she goes to work up at my head. I see a light come in from my left, a very bright light, so bright that I feel like I have to squint, but my eyes are already closed. And then once that light comes in, I can see her hands, like almost like an x-ray of them.
And many times what happens is people will come regardless of what they've come for, and they'll have a spiritual experience that is quite moving for them while I'm working on them.
I sense healing as energy, and dealing with people is to feel whether there's energy moving or there's no energy moving. You walk in a hospital room and you sense whether there's energy for healing. So sometimes dealing with people is trying to help them to not so much create energy, but to tap into the energy so that they can be healed. And a couple of folks that I can think of in dying is a real absence of energy, except one death I can think of is kind of a surplus of energy, and he had to get her to let go. It was like there was too much energy and she was hanging on, and just to gently say to her, it's okay to let go. And she kind of surprised me because it took me 5 minutes to walk home, and the hospital called me, told me she was gone. But my sense of healing has been that energy. I've been to several large seminars where healing was present, and you can kind of sense the energy moving in the room.
There are a lot of forms of spiritual healing, and I've talked to lots of people who've been through many of them. I spent 9 years over and over again visiting a healing shrine in Canada, St. Anne de Beaupré, interviewing people who went there for healing, interviewing the people who were there, helping the sick people. I've talked to people locally who believe that they have been healed in the middle of church services or by prayer groups or through spontaneous experiences of divine healing, feeling themselves in the presence of God. I guess what I would have to say is that I have personally seen examples of those healings for which I can't imagine a real good alternative, sort of typical straight medical explanation. Now, some people, Jerome Frank and some of the other medical writers on these things say, well, what that tells us is that the placebo effect is much more powerful than we ever imagined. But that's just a statement of opinion. It's because he's uncomfortable with the explanation that the people themselves give. The explanation that they give makes very good sense to me. I mean, it conforms to their experience, and it's not a foolish or irrational belief, and it's certainly a kind of belief that people all over the world hold in all different kinds of religions, and have done so for a very long time.
The doctors had sort of given up on him. Kidney was that bad, and he had problems walking and functioning, so they just given him up for a certain period of time. His kidney would go bad, and there was nothing else they could do. Pastor prayed for him. Something evidently came over him, because next thing we know, his legs buckled, and he just kind of went slowly to the floor. And I think his mother or father helped. We kind of helped him up. The people that were on the altar helping the pastor, intercessors they helped him up. And a report came back maybe a couple of days afterwards. No, I think it was at another service. He came back and testified, or his mother testified. Do you know that the doctors told me that my son's kidney looked like it was a brand new kidney, and they have no explanation of what happened. It's like there was no malfunction, there was no damage. It's as strong as it should be for his age, and it's been probably a good year now, and he's functioning fine.
The decision to incorporate alternatives into a healthcare regimen requires careful consideration. There are charlatans who would take advantage of patients at a time when they are most vulnerable.
Is this something that's honest? Because there are quacks, there are people who are out there to make a quick buck from sick people. You need to be concerned for that. Then you need to be concerned with, will doing this interfere with something that my physician is doing for me that seems to be giving me some benefit? Is there a conflict or a clash that's going to develop? If not, then the next one that you have to be concerned with is, will this practice is it practical, feasible, and comfortable for me? There are some alternative practices that put an enormous burden on the person who wants to be healed.
While there are benefits in the ability to achieve a hypnotic state, there are dangers as well. The same trance state that can induce healing can also provoke illness.
People who are highly hypnotizable are at a disadvantage, particularly if they're in a situation where they're being programmed with negative suggestions. Then it creates psychological and psychosomatic problems for them.
I think licensing of healers is an idea whose time has come. We have license of massage therapists, which is a very new idea. In the past 100 years, we've seen licensing of various kinds of mental health professionals. But there is, at present, no licensing for healers. Perhaps this is because healing is not understood at large, and there needs to be more understanding, more exploration, both scientific and otherwise. The laws regulating the practice of medicine are very broad, and someone could conceivably make the case that a healer is practicing medicine. I don't believe that a healer does practice medicine. I think what they're doing is completely separate. But we have to look at what the law says. And the law defines the practice of medicine as encompassing diagnosis and treatment. When a healer can see things in the energy field, is the healer diagnosing? When the healer is laying on hands, is a healer treating a person?
Well, the first thing I would say, I would not go to anybody just because they had the sign or shingle out on the door. I would consult with your doctor or a psychologist you're dealing with or somebody and in effect check out who you're dealing with. But I think as long as the people who are doing it are properly licensed, like the person I've been dealing with is properly licensed, she's a nurse and she's an established professional. I think if you have that kind of background and you have people who will recommend them, I think then those are the kind of people that you ought to deal with. But I would avoid just going to anybody because they have this a shingle out.
There are a host of issues that need to be considered once one examines how to apply the current regulatory framework to healers. One of the issues is how to separate the real people from the charlatans. That's one issue. Another issue is to look at the many contributions that healers can make to the field of bioethics, which deals with decisions at the boundaries of life and death. For example, what about a patient who's dying? Does a healer have a perception here that can aid in deciding what to do for that patient? What kind of care should be rendered?
While the therapeutic power of hypnosis or altered states of consciousness may explain some of the benefits patients receive from alternative therapies, patients' stories suggest that other features exist within the process of spiritual healing. Patients describe a fusion of internal and external power. For some, the combination of traditional Western medicine with spiritual healing becomes a potent restorative alloy. For others, Wondrous Healing is an effortless, holistic mix of ideas about ourselves and the things within us from birth to death. It concerns the very elements of our humanity, and even those things larger than ourselves: nature, the moral world, and indeed, the very nature of God.